destinations. With great privilege that we are joined by our Chief Strategy Officer, Paul DePodesta, in studio with us. And Paul, the yesterday kind of a culmination of a very thorough process and search. And is once yesterday's done and you have the introductory press conference with the coach and that part is done, I know you got lots of big issues here still to go. Is there a sense of relief of we got our guy and here we go?
I think last night it was more like, let's get to work. The last couple of days were a lot of introductions, even for Kevin around the office, getting to know everybody, both on the football side, the business side, and then we got to introduce them to the community, yesterday. Last night we, hunkered down here and got to work, started working on his staff and some other things we need to do, around the football operation, including the GM search and others. So I think we're excited to finally start moving forward.
Paul, yesterday you talked about great organizations have an identity or a way, the Patriot way, and then you went on to say the Cleveland Brown way. What is that? If you could articulate what we, the Cleveland Browns, hope that is and aspire to have it be.
Yeah, I can't tell you that. Then it wouldn't be special. No, it's a great question, and I think it's something that's been building for the last couple of years as we learn more and more about what it is that we can do. I mean, the fundamental question we have to ask ourselves is, how can we be consistently better than our competition? Like, what's going to be our edge, right? And that question can be asked across all different parts of the football operation. Like, what's possibly our edge in the draft? Like, what's possibly our edge when we're talking about free agent players? What's possibly our edge in coaching or in game management? Or there are all these different things, but we have to ask that question. You mentioned the Patriot way, which I referenced yesterday. They've never sort of published what their way is, but from the outside, we can look at it and try to discern, what that is. So it won't be ever something that we publish. And my guess is it's also something that will continue to evolve as we learn things every year. But I think we have a pretty clear vision at this point of what it's going to look like. Now, the GM that we hire is going to have some real input into that as well. This will be a collective effort as we put together the vision. But like I said, I think the foundation of that vision is certainly in place internally, and we're excited to sort of get it rolling.
Go ahead.
You mentioned the GM search, and I know in the head coaching search you guys went through a very exhaustive one, 8 candidates. Do you have kind of a ballpark number of candidates that you guys kind of have on your short list right now for the GM process? Is it going to be a big group, a smaller group?
My guess will be smaller than that. We've been vetting a lot of candidates, just like we did with the head coaching search. Look, there are a lot more coaches than there are front office people, just naturally, like around the game. There's more positions. So I think just that being the case, we'll end up with fewer GM candidates. But we're really zeroing in on the ones that we're actually going to interview. My guess is we'll interview anywhere from 3 to 5. Okay. We've put some permissions, out there to talk to some folks, and we're still finalizing some schedules. So we don't know exactly what that's going to look like yet. But if I had to guess, it'd be somewhere in that range.
Paul, you mentioned yesterday that when you first got here in 2016, it was you had to learn the NFL. You had to learn that process. It'd be silly for you to weigh in on things when you're learning the league at that point. And but now that you've been around the league for a long time, and juxtapose that with the comment you made yesterday when you talked about how comprehensive the draft process is, and I think about the fact that you get 3 years to watch a kid, since they were done with high school, which is different from the other sports where you're trying to project what they'll be. You think when you draft Baker Mayfield, he's ready-made. Like, exactly who you're drafting in that sense. And so while the process is more comprehensive, these guys more, why is it still so hard to land these things and to hit on guys, especially in when you're talking about the draft and in free agency, to project how they are? And how have you put in processes to try to limit that risk?
So I mentioned one word yesterday, and it's really fundamental to everything we do, and that's uncertainty. Right? There's just so much uncertainty with everything we do. And what we're really trying to do in all these circumstances is just corral that uncertainty, right? We're never going to eliminate it. We're never going to be able to perfectly predict the future. But, to your point, what processes can we put in place to get our arms around that uncertainty and just make it a little less uncertain, Right. I tell you what, these jobs it's really, really hard. I mean, picking players is really, really hard. And in football, it's particularly difficult because it's a player's performance is so dependent on other factors. What are his teammates like? What scheme are they running? Is he even in the right environment? What's his coaching like? I mean, there's a lot that goes into it that's probably more important than just he threw 20 touchdowns and 5 picks. Right, we really need to understand the why and how those things happened. Not so much that, hey, this was the production. Oh, and this guy had better numbers than this guy, so therefore we should take him. That's really not it at all. I mean, we have to go, a few layers deeper than that to really try to understand the performance, because what we're trying to predict is whether or not that performance is going to, either maintain or grow, at the NFL level. So it's a very sort of different question that we have to ask. But I think that's why it's so complicated. There's just so many different factors that go into it, and it's really difficult to strip all those apart and say, well, okay, yes, he had 20 touchdowns and 5 picks. Well, this is how much the wide receivers contributed to that. This is how much the offensive line contributed to that. This is exactly how much the coaching contributed to that. Like, that's impossible, right? I mean, it's just impossible. What we have tried to put some things in place to get as good a grasp as we can on those types of things to reduce the uncertainty, but it's tough. It's still very difficult.
Yeah. From the draft standpoint, I'm sure another change is in baseball. First of all, you're selecting, I don't even know how many rounds there are, but a significantly greater pool. And there's also a very long lead time as they work their way. Very few guys are going to be drafted, and then you expect them to be right on your major league roster. Whereas in the NFL, you have a limited number of players you're able to add. They are the best value for the dollar on an NFL roster. And you need kind of an immediate contribution from them. You kind of know pretty soon whether or not this worked the way you wanted it to or did not.
No, absolutely. It was interesting in baseball. A lot of times you draft a guy and, like you said, you're looking at 4, 5, 6 years into the future, and you hope maybe he can contribute to your major league team. Here we're talking about 6 months into the future that you expect him to contribute to your NFL team, right?
Yeah.
But, and I think because of that, sometimes our expectations of what these players ought to be able to do is a little skewed. We've watched them on TV. They've played in the SEC or they've played in the Pac-12 or Big Ten. They've played in front of crowds of 100,000 people. They've done great things, and we expect that, we'll just see that, at First Energy Field in September. I think it's probably a lot like great high school players going to college. There's a real adjustment period. There are a real select few true college freshmen who stand out in the college game, who just from the day they step on campus are great players. I think the same's true in the NFL. There's a growth process that has to take place for players. And in college, there are a lot more sophomores that look interesting than freshmen, and then juniors, they really come into their own. I think the same maturation process happens in the NFL, where you think you've got these great stars, but look, it takes some time for them to get their sea legs. So in the first year, you'll get glimpses of that. I think in the second year, you'll see more, and in the third year, you probably have a much better feel of, hey, this is what this guy really is, at the NFL level. So while it's exciting to get those guys in April and have them on your team in September, the reality is that's still just the start of the process, and they're still going to grow for the next couple of years.
And when you look at, players and you talk about eliminating some uncertainty, I would imagine part of it is also understanding the importance of various positions in the NFL. And I know when you came in, you said, look, I needed to learn the game. And even in the time you've been with the Browns, the NFL has changed because the league trends one way, then there's a reaction and a correction this way. Is that something that you have enjoyed, maybe the study of? I don't want you to give me the answer to it, but of how various positions have evolved in importance, and that would thus guide free agency decisions, budget allocation decisions on a roster and the composition and all of that. Has that been kind of a fun thing? And is that something you feel like now at this point you guys maybe have a better handle on than you did, obviously, when you first started out?
Sure. No, look, it's a complicated game. It's part of the fun, for us. I mean, as we try to figure it out, like you said, not every position's created equal. They all have a real role to play, but they do have different values. And if you talk to different people around football, which we've done, over the years, is you get very different opinions as to what's more important or how you would build a team. Even in all the head coaching interviews that we've done over the years, almost everyone have very different conceptions as to what they think is the most important thing on the field, other than quarterback. That's consensus. That one's consensus. But other than that, people have other ideas of, hey, if they were running an expansion franchise and they had a quarterback, what would be the next 5 positions? And you get very different answers, all very well thought out, with really interesting ideas sort of behind them. But they're all a little different. So that has taken some time. That's something that would certainly fall into our shared vision, or the Browns way, is to have a defined set of sort of rankings for all those positions. I think I think we're pretty much there, but but as you said, it can change every year. We try to stay on top of it now every year once we have a pretty good framework for at least understanding it.
The beauty of this game too, Paul, is that the playing field is virtually level. That if you draft well, you can sign your players and you can keep them forever. And that's something that's different than any other sport in this country, where you don't have to worry about retaining. You can keep them, you sign them, you draft them, you keep them, and then an organization can go. And it doesn't matter market size. To the best organizations of the last 30 years, the Steelers and the Packers are in places that are smaller market sizes, and you can do it if you're smart, right? I mean, that's the thing. If you have the right processes in place, you can win anywhere. And you've been here long enough to kind of get a feel, I think, for what it would mean here to win.
Oh, there's no doubt. There's no doubt. I think to a large degree you're right in terms of being able to keep it together. I hope we get to the point, and I think what we're all shooting for is that it actually becomes impossible to keep it all together. You have so many good players,
right.
that you can't just due to the cap or other considerations. But very few teams have pushed up against that limit. But hopefully we do. No, look, Cleveland's a special place, and I've told this story before. I worked with the Indians. I lived here back in the mid '90s. We had some unbelievable teams, and in '97, I was in Lakewood the night that Tony Fernandez scooped out that Armando Benitez slider down and in, hit it out to right field, and sent us to the World Series. Right, and I was the advance scout for the Indians at the time, and I had to get back into the office to print the advance report for the World Series, which I had refused to do out of superstition. Up until that point, and I had a hard time getting back into the office because of traffic in downtown, and everyone's parked and people were on top of cars, and I mean it was a wild scene. And I finally got into the office and I ran into someone there who was a native Clevelander, and I said, "Boy, it's crazy out there, right?" And he looked at me and with total sincerity and said, "Yeah, it's crazy, but you have no idea what this would be like if this were the Browns."
Right.
Now, just to put this in some perspective, in 1997, there were no Browns. Right. That was one of the 3 years that there was no team. So for him to say that, it just really, really struck me that, wow. I mean, this is because, believe me, it was crazy, and everyone was in the end. I never went to a game back then. It was the Jake, but I never went there where it wasn't sold out. Right. Unbelievable fan support. For him to make that comparison, obviously now it's more than 20 years later, and it's stuck with me. And I think we all feel that here. That boy, if we do this right, which we all desperately want to do, it just has the chance to be. Not just special, I think unlike any other place.
Thanks for stopping by, man.
Absolutely.
No,
Good to
happy
see
to do it.
And we're not going to speak that into existence. We're going to work for it, but you are right. It would be something special.
It's what we do. Football's what we do.
It's what we do.
Paul, thank you. Paul
Thank you,
DePodesta,
guys.
Chief Strategy Officer of the Cleveland Browns, joining us here in studio. Jim Donovan.